And right now, John McMullen at JF McMullen will join us to do so here on the Sports Bash. Johnny Mac, this is a division that used to be kind of like if you're 500, you get in. Right now, it could be one of the best divisions in football if things go, Houston's pretty good. Indy is very good. Jacksonville went to the AFC Championship game a couple of years ago, and Tennessee was a playoff team last year.
Yeah, I think this is the most competitive division in football right now. I think it's the only division where you can make an argument for every single team that they could win it. I think it's that close. I think it's that competitive. And I don't think, as I said, there's another division in football where all four teams are that close together, that competitive.
Let's start with Indianapolis, all right? Because Frank Reich's out there, Andrew Luck's out there. This is a team that last year really came on. I mean, the Eagles had beat them, and they didn't look all that good, and then all of a sudden they kind of took off. And a lot of people think this could be a possible Super Bowl team. So, is Andrew Luck back to like an MVP type of player?
I think he's closer to that. I'm not sure if he's completely back to the pre-injury form. Certainly when the Eagles saw him early last year, he wasn't close. The arm strength wasn't there, and it progressed as the season went on. So in theory, I think from their perspective, you have an off season. He's completely healthy for the first time, or at least as healthy as he can be as an NFL quarterback. And if that arm strength returns, that mobility returns, then you are talking about a guy who's in that conversation as not only a potential top 5 quarterback, but a potential MVP type player. So that's exciting to have, and they remember it before, and now the hope is that he can get back to that level.
Yeah, and this is a team, the Colts here with Frank Reich, who's turned into a pretty good head coach out there. He it's a creative offense. They threw the ball a ton last year, right? I mean, this is a team that really they leaned on him, and I would think in year 2 they probably are going to lean on him more. And he's got some interesting weapons out there. You got T.Y. Hilton, Funches they brought in, Doyle and Ebron, 2 pretty good receiving tight ends. So this could be an offense. Now, the running game has always been an issue with Indianapolis. I don't really know who's going to be the main ball carrier out there, but he certainly has some interesting weapons.
Yeah, you can see some sort of Eagles imprints on the offense, and when Frank was here, I don't think to have sort of like the Eagles have been trying to get and hope they've gotten back with Deshaun Jackson. I think the lone thing they're looking for is the true deep threat. Maybe that could open things up, but they have a really good tight end in Jack Doyle. And you mentioned that running back, it's by committee. It's Marlon Mack. It's Nyheim Hines, who's good as a receiver. So it's more of a committee approach, and they got good but not great receivers. So, and you had Paris Campbell, who's a second-round pick this year, who's really talented guy. Some people had him late first round, a few people. So he's something that can add to that receiving corps as well. And then the big issue for years there, even before the injuries started to pile up, and that theme we talked about yesterday, offensive line, and they've turned the corner. And they've turned the corner because they've addressed it. Quentin Nelson, look, he should have been Rookie of the Year. They're never going to give it to an offensive lineman, but he's that dominant. And then you talk about Ryan Kelly at center. That's a first-round pick dating back a couple of years. So they've gotten much better up front, and that makes things easier. It really does, and we talk about it all the time. Their offensive line has gone from terrible to really good pretty quickly.
John, you mentioned the offensive line. They're pretty good there up front, as you mentioned. They're pretty good on the offensive side of the ball all over the place. They got good, solid stuff. But on defense, this is a team that's gotten pretty good, too. They're pretty much solid all over the place. But if one area for them is a problem, I guess the corner spot has been a problem for them. So Did they address that in the offseason? Are they better on the corners? Because that was their one area of concern last year.
Well, they drafted Rocky Sin, who's the corner from Temple, and he's got a lot of physical gifts and skills. He's long, he's lengthy. He's what you look for in a modern corner. So I think they're very high on him to help there. I think the bigger issue, and this kind of plays into everything, everywhere in this league, is what sort of the chicken and the egg. Is it the pass rush or is it the coverage on the back end? I think it depends. I mean, if you have a good pass rush, you can get away with some lesser coverage people. If you don't have a good pass rush, you better have some coverage people. And the Colts have struggled on the pass rush for a number of years. They got a little bit better last year. They started to turn the corner, and they brought in Justin Houston. Now, that's a veteran guy. That's a big name who's had a lot of success. I don't know how much he has left in the tank, but if he's close to what he once was in Kansas City, I mean, that's going to be really, really helpful.
It's an interesting team, that the Colts team, and the offensive line. We'll see how they hold up, and obviously that defense. But they got luck. So you got the shot there because you probably have the best quarterback in the division. The second guy would be probably Watson in Houston, and let's go down to take a look at what Houston brings to the table here, because you got Watson, they've got DeAndre Hopkins, Will Fuller, Lamar Miller. It's a pretty good offense there, but their offensive line not great.
No, and that's been the issue there. And Deshaun Watson, you mentioned, has taken a beating for the first couple of years of his career. Part of it is, also he's the kind of guy who's going to try to extend plays, which we talk about a lot. So you expect a little bit more as far as sack numbers when you have a quarterback like that. But, yeah, I mean, the clear weakness of that team is the offensive line, and they've been in that group of good teams that we've talked about that sort of overcome that. And that tells you how good the rest of the town is. When you have a bottom 5 offensive line or bottom 10 offensive line, and that's where Houston has been, that's where Seattle has been, that's where Minnesota has been, and you still make the playoffs, that means you got a lot of good players elsewhere. And I think that's the case with Houston. Offensively, I mean, you know how explosive Deshaun Watson is, and I don't think there's a better receiver in football than DeAndre Hopkins. Lamar Miller can run the football. They have a lot of weapons, but that offensive line is an issue.
Mm-hmm. Yep, and, it's interesting because defense, they got big names. Watt, Jadeveon Clowney are two guys that everybody probably knows. But what about other than those two guys? I mean, what's behind them? It's a big year for Jadeveon Clowney, too. I mean, he came in as a superstar when he was drafted, the highlight film type of hits. What kind of player has he been? And he's on a contract year this year.
Yeah, I mean, he's franchised, and he's not going to get the extension. So this is a big year for him,
yeah.
And he's likely going to hit unrestricted free agency. And if he has a big year as a pass rusher, I mean, he's going to make a mint on the open market. He's just a tremendously talented guy. And you add that, if you think about their front seven, and you mentioned J.J. Watt, who's 3-time Defensive Player of the Year, he's not quite what he was at the height of his career. Because of all the injuries, but he's still really, really good, really, really talented. And then because of Watt and Clowney, you don't hear a lot about Whitney Merciless, but he's dominant at times. You don't hear a lot about McKinney at linebacker, but he's dominant at times. So, yeah, I mean, their front seven is one of the most talented in football, and it hasn't changed. And we just talked about it in Indianapolis. That helps the secondary when you're that good up front. And they're pretty good in the defensive backfield as well. It's not like they don't have talent back there and they're making up for it. I mean, Jonathan Joseph has been good. Tayshaun Gibson has been solid in Jacksonville in the past. Justin Reed, Aaron Colvin. So they have some good players back there as well. They're not quite as dominant as what they sport in the front seven. But overall, this is one of the better and more talented defenses in the NFL.
Yeah, well, the interesting thing about, they got Clowney there. He was such, it was that one play that everybody saw where he took the guy's helmet off, but he has not been a game-changing defensive player. But him and Watt have never really been healthy together, it seems like.
Well, I think, when you talk about number one overall picks, there's sort of like a sliding scale. And so much is expected of you. I think if you just look at it from the perspective of are people, when they're game planning from Houston, are they concerned about Jadeveon Clowney? And the answer is yes. He's a really good player. Mm-hmm. Did he live up to the hype maybe as number one overall? You could argue no. But if he went number 15 overall, you'd be talking about him. You'd be lauding him and saying how good he is. So a lot of that is expectations. He's really good. Yeah. And I think part of the concern is injuries and the fact that he was hurt. He had microfracture surgery during his rookie year. So people are always concerned when they hear that type of surgery about long-term contracts. But he's a good player. He really is.
John, I'm going to go back to Watson. And, he had the big year, then the injury, and where he is now. Do you look at him as a quarterback that can take his team to a Super Bowl?
Yeah. I don't think there's any question about Deshaun Watson as a quarterback in this league. I think you're always concerned about guys like that from a health perspective, and he's already been injured significantly once. And then you add on top the poor offensive line. So in theory, you've got a guy behind the poor offensive line who's going to take sacks, by the way, even if they had a good offensive line, because that's the type of player he is, and he wants to extend plays. So you have some concern from that standpoint. But as far as skill set, talent, ability to throw the football, yeah, he's going to be a top-level guy if he can stay healthy.
Yeah, and obviously that's a team that has not had a lot of playoff success. I mean, it's a team that Bill O'Brien, I guess we got to ask about him. I mean, is this a big year for him?
Yeah, I mean, we sort of like the Jets. They went through a weird struggle, a power struggle. You see it all over this league over a number of years, and it just seems to be rampant. I mean, guys can't get along, and when there's a little bit of a success and there's a power vacuum, you got general managers fighting with coaches. We've seen it in Philadelphia in the past. One of the reasons the Eagles turned the corner is Howie Roseman 2.0 has been able to get along with people better than he was the first time he had the job. I can't explain it, but it happens everywhere. And it happened in Houston, and Bill O'Brien won it. So when you win something like that, and Brian Gaine is gone, and he wasn't there for a very long time, all similar to Chip Kelly here. Well, now the microscope's on you. So if it goes bad, guess who's getting blamed?
Yeah, well, I know he's kind of a polarizing guy out there with there's a big split for whether they like O'Brien or not. I think he's done a pretty good job. He hasn't had a lot of quarterbacks to work with. I mean, when you're playing with some of the guys he's had out there, I got to tip my cap that they've been in the playoff. T.J. Yates started a playoff game for them. I mean, so I like Bill O'Brien. Tennessee made the playoffs last year. Marcus Mariota, big year for him. I mean, this could be it for him in Tennessee. That draft class is now coming to the end of their contracts. So Mariota in Tennessee, Derrick Henry, beast year last year. Delaney Walker hurt, but he's back. Very good tight end. Corey Davis was a first-round pick. Their line's pretty good, but it just doesn't seem like their offense scares anybody.
No, it doesn't, and that's because of the quarterback. There's just not the level of consistency you need to take that next step. So I think there is a ceiling with that team, but it is a good team, and it's a team that's capable of winning 9-10 games and being on the cusp of that playoff level and being a playoff team, but you don't see him taking that leap to 12 or 13 wins and being a dominant team, and it's tough to do that if you're in purgatory at the quarterback position. And, I think the biggest indictment of Marcus Mariota is that they've had to tell people again and again and again that there's no competition because they brought in Ryan Tannehill as the backup. And there is no competition. But Ryan Tannehill is a terrible quarterback. So the fact that you have to tell people that he's not pushing Marcus Mariota kind of tells you there's an issue.
Defense is pretty good here, though. Jarrell Casey, Cameron Wake, Brown, Byard's one of the best safeties in the league. Malcolm Butler's out there. Vaccaro at safety. Logan Ryan. You got guys that you recognize, and this is another reason why they made the playoffs last year.
Yeah, very good defense, very talented defense. Starts up front with Jarrell Casey, who's one of the best run stuffers in this league, and he kind of sets the tone. And if you're playing, coaches talk about it all the time. If it's 2nd and 2, you're going to have a lot of success. If it's 2nd and 9, or even worse, 2nd and 11, you're in trouble. And he kind of sets the tone for that defense, and he's going to continue to do so. He's an all-pro level player. And the back seven is really good, really talented, and specifically the secondary. You mentioned Byard. Kenny Vaccaro's there now. He's more of a old school safety, so you could take advantage of him in coverage at times. But the corners are solid, and you see that New England sort of imprint, and they're one of those teams. GM is from New England, and they bring in Logan Ryan. They bring in Malcolm Butler. They also have a good nickel corner in Adoree Jackson. So it's a really good group on the back end and a really effective group. So I would say, yeah, no question, defensively, I think is the biggest strength of the Tennessee Titans right now, and that shouldn't be a surprise because Mike Vrabel's the head coach, and he had all that success with the Patriots, so that should be no surprise that they have a defensive mindset.
So their big question is, do they have enough offensive firepower to win this division, because it's going to be competitive? And then there's Jacksonville, who won the division a couple of years ago. They went to the AFC Championship game. They added Nick Foles. So I guess the biggest question, we start with Foles. Can he duplicate what he did in Philadelphia and take Jacksonville to the next level? They got Leonard Fournette there, obviously, who's been a kind of I don't even know what to call him. He's been hurt so much. He's been very good when he plays, but he doesn't play all the time. I mean, it seemed like they were unhappy with him last year. There was thought that they would get rid of him because of it, and then they brought him back. So he's there, so they got him. They've got a couple of weapons. I mean, you got some intriguing guys in Lee and Westbrook, but those guys have been banged up too. So is adding Nick Foles to this offense enough to make them a contender?
Are you questioning Nick Foles, Mike?
How dare I?
Well, and we'll see. Nick Foles will have his opportunity. There's no question he deserves to be a starting quarterback in this league. You know how I feel. I think he's overrated by Philadelphia fans. I think he's a closer, not a starter. I don't think he can hold up and play at a high level for 16 games, but he'll have an opportunity to prove differently. You mentioned Leonard Fournette. I don't know, and I said this when he got drafted, and as high as he got drafted, to me, he's a two-down running back. It's a different game. It's a different era. I don't know if the value is there, but he's a good runner when he's healthy, and that's an issue. I don't see a ton of weapons either offensively outside the numbers. Marquise Lee is a pretty good player. D.D. Westbrook, okay. They drafted Josh Oliver to be the tight end, but that's I don't think he's going to hit the ground running and be really good right off the bat. So I don't see a ton of playmakers offensively. So they're going to have to go about it and win games defensively, and that's their strength, and it continues to be their strength. They were the number one defense right there with Minnesota 2 years ago. They're not quite that good any longer, but they still have a ton of talent on the defensive side of the ball, and that's the strength of the team.
Yeah, Ramsey, AJ, they're very good back there. And then the wide receivers, they're going to need help in that spot. We'll see if Foles can elevate some of those guys. He would be the X factor, though. The way Foles plays, I mean, they got pieces around there. It'll be interesting to see Doug Marrone, how they end up using. He was a guy at Syracuse, and then when he was in Buffalo. He's an offensive-minded guy, so it's interesting. I know that who's the offensive coordinator whose name is slipping me, DeFilippo. So you got an interesting setup there for Foles. I'm interested to see how they end up using him. But, all right, these four teams, Jacksonville, Houston, Indy, and Tennessee, how do you rank them?
Well, I think Indianapolis should be number one. I think they have the fewest issues to overcome. From there, I think Houston would be my second-place team. Then I would go Jacksonville, then Tennessee. But as I said, the difference between 4 and 1 in this division is minute.
Yeah.
And I think – and this might be a cop-out, but that's what the NFL is. I think the healthiest team wins this division. I think that's how close it is. And the team that suffers the fewest numbers of attrition, I think it's going to win the division. I think they're all playoff-level teams if things go correctly. And that makes for tremendous competition. And as I said at the beginning, this is the only division in football you can make a case for every team to win it. And you can make a good case for every team to win it.
Yep, I said it's maybe the best division, the deepest division where all four teams have a shot. John McMullen, we're previewing all the divisions. This week it's the AFC. Tomorrow it's the West. And on Friday, we will look at the conference as a whole. Who are the best teams, the worst teams? Who has legit shots to win it? AFC this week, NFC next week.